Hello everyone, welcome to our blog Doing Sociology. Today we are extremely grateful and honored to have two superb social anthropologists and filmmakers with us. We bring to you an interview with Professor Lina Fruzzetti and Dr. Ákos Östor. Just to briefly introduce them, Professor Fruzzetti had joined the Anthropology Department at Brown University in 1975. Dr. Ostor has previously taught in the Anthropology Department at Harvard, and in 1988 he joined Wesleyan University. Some of their co-directed films include Seed and Earth, Fishers of Da, and Singing Pictures, whereas some of their major co-authored publications include Kinship and Ritual in Bengal and Culture and Change along the Blue Nile. They bring to this interview their extensive experience from the film as well as dealing with visual ethnography. We hope that all of you will benefit from this interview as we bring to you two of them, and let's move on to the questions and answers. Welcome Professor Fruzzetti and Dr. Ostor to our blog, to our platform, and thank you so much for your time, especially doing this across continents and across countries and time zones. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So to begin with, may I ask that, there is a considerable debate on the changing nature and practice of social anthropology. So how do you understand these changes? I mean, maybe one should probably ask that whether you actually see a shift, or are these debates actually presenting themselves differently, but they're actually earlier ones? Do you see any difference from your student days and what is happening today?
So I'll start first. Yeah, I see major changes, obviously, in the field of social anthropology. When I first started and when I first began to teach at Brown University, the idea was that you approach the field from a fourth field perspective. You had archaeology, linguistic, social anthropology, and biological anthropology, or physical anthropology. And today, many of these schools don't go in that line of teaching of fields or topics that were within the field. And the question to ask is what's happening to the field? Why is it that, for example, many institutions choose to just do social anthropology, and then within that social anthropology, it's also broken into multiplicity of other sub-discipline or topic with such as migration and population, or literature and anthropology, medical anthropology, and you keep on adding all of philosophical anthropology, if there was such a thing. But it becomes, you take the field and you stretch it to the point where we lose the focus of what originally the field was all about. But maybe it is time for it to change. So that if we talk about the English department, English department has broken up into so many topics within it. So why do we face these kinds of changes today? And what does it have to do with the origins of the discipline? This is one way that I see it happening. Breaking up into so many fields with their own specialty, and also sometimes with their own ways of going about to collect data. So if we talk about ethnographic research method, not all of these subdisciplines go about doing the kind of work that, for example, Ákos and I did in the late 60s or early 70s. I don't think people have the tolerance of spending 4 years or 2 years at one stretch doing field work. Secondly, you find that not many actually want to spend the time to learn the language. And so you use translations, or you use people to sort of assist you in the field. And so all of these really does impact on how we we think about anthropology today. Recently, I had a debate with somebody in history, and they are coming closer to what we used to call anthropology, as we in anthropology move away into something else. But yet, department keep.
Again, I'm not sure.
Department keep, Deepali is here. Department keep the word, the name, and this anthropology. So yeah, there is a lot of changes. And I don't know in 10 years time, whether we still have this so-called discipline, or whether we're gonna move into, you know, if we say anthropology, whether we understand the same way that we understood when we entered the field. You know?
Yeah, I think the question is this reasons for why the field is now so kind of diverse and so split up between, almost like, I think it's telling that the Anthropological Association has a what do they call these fields? They kind of interest or some kind of. It's almost like a company or an economic commercial undertaking, dividing up its marketing fields in different countries, in different societies. But for us, I think the most interesting part is not so much how the field is changing, but what things were like when we started and what we continue to practice. So, for example, I still find it very helpful to have done a lot of evolutionary theory, a lot of archaeology, a lot of linguistics, alongside social anthropological or what also in India goes in some places as sociology. So these fields have blurred a lot recently, and part of the reason is also the very success of anthropology of the 60s and 70s, that, you know, methods of field work, the theory of culture, for example, is now commonplace in from
many
journalism to
literature,
you know,
history,
and even scientific fields that have merged so closely in recent specialties of DNA studies, for example, totally upended anthropological theories of evolution, for example.
So it could be, maybe it's a good thing. It enriches the field.
Yeah.
But as you enrich the field, do we still know what anthropology is today?
Yeah.
Do we need to?
Well, there's still that question, and what is emerging today, we won't see for sure how it pans out till years later. So there are massive changes going on. Some of them you alluded to here in terms of the changing society. For example, more specifically, at universities, the increased kind of administrative control of departments, of even going down to shaping what gets to be delivered to students, and students' expectations have changed. These have all added together to the differences between particular departments and particular countries, as well as the way the practices, if not a unified discipline, but the way these practices shape up today. So, but what there is interesting. For example, your other questions, you know, what drives these changes, the fact that there is more indigenous anthropology, or what they used to call, I remember Srini was responding to questions about what does he think about anthropologists studying their own society. Now, in India, you know, for example, someone from Bengal, West Bengal, to study in Gujarat and so on, is equally comparative, equally, it's not, it's, say, for example, from someone from Italy to study in Spain or Portugal. So these are often underestimated, the differences. So what seems to have to stay as a core is a kind of a ethnographic and by now historical ethnographic, as Lina said. Evans Pritchard used to say that eventually anthropology, social anthropology, becomes history. Now we've experienced that in our work, that people go back to our 60s, 70s, 80s work in West Bengal and refer to it as something in the past. You know, it's a kind of a vignette, is a kind of a screenshot of the past, you know, which is fine.
And that is the case, actually. But one of the questions also that you asked, and you alluded to it, Ákos, about indigenous anthropologists working, for example, Maitri Chowdhury, beloved anthropology friend, she works on in Delhi amongst in one of her papers among domestic workers from Bangladesh, and she refers to the crisis between her who she thinks she's the insider, being Indian and Bengali speaker, working with Bangladeshi migrants, and yet there is this distance, and so it is not like she's at some point an insider, but she can be an insider and an outsider both at the same time, in contrast to outsiders like us who comes to study, let's say in Bengal, and we are in fact separate. But I found that in itself an interesting dilemma that's coming out in the field. When indigenous people actually do research on their own community, what are the topics they choose to work on? I find that fascinating, in contrast to what people like us go and study women's ritual or the Gajan or Durga Puja. This is very interesting times to see the changes that are going on in the field.
Thank you. So I understand, you know, the changes which are taking place in social anthropology as such due to various reasons, as you very much pointed out, you know, how indigenous scholars are also doing anthropological research. But I have a related question to that, which is on multi-sided ethnography. So, you know, in the recent years, we've seen how multi-sided ethnography has become important. How do you, you know, see that change? What are the reasons probably that has given rise to this?
You have to first tell me what your understanding is of multi-sided. The way I see multi-sided, because I teach these in classes, if you do fieldwork, let's say, in an urban setting among the Muslim community, in a village setting, rural area, also in the village community, this would be a type of a comparative multi-sided kind of ethnography. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Or is it the case that you refer to different issues, the same type of issue being studied in different places or localities, or different issues being compared in different places? So I think both of, see, in our case, if you take, we were among perhaps among the first, if not necessarily the first, but not that many people studied in a town, a kind of an administrative center like Vishnupur, when we started in the 60s. It was mostly people studied in villages. Now, of course, people in Africa and so forth have begun to move into the study of cities and towns, perhaps earlier. But as Clifford Gertz used to say, we don't study places. We study in places, but we study a kind of a comparative, almost an ethnographic approach that embraces generalizing within cases. So it's not a situation of specific places being compared, but whatever we do has to do with field work, ethnographic observation, empirical study, and then theoretically based generalizations and comparisons, which merge the ethnography into more of an anthropology that is universalist, comparative, historical, and without these elements, it's very hard to hang on to a kind of a unified comparative anthropological discipline, as we talked about it before.
But is this what you meant by multi-sided ethnography?
Yes, this is what we meant. Thank you for answering. So when again we were speaking about changes, do you think that probably it's the reflexive turn which has played a role in changing the discipline, or feminist interrogation? What would be your comments on that?
On
what was the question?
It wasn't very clear, but can you repeat it again?
Let me repeat it. Sorry, it must be the network. So I wanted to know that what would be your comments on how different new anthropological theories have actually, changed questions in anthropology, in the sense that, do you feel that the reflexive school that has played a role in changing the discipline, or what about the feminist style of interrogation?
Well, when for example, I'll answer on the second part of your question, the feminist. When I first started to work on the question of gender in Vishnupur, let's say, a lot of my early advisors or colleagues would just say it's a waste of time, because you can't really achieve the kind of credibility in anthropology unless you look at a holistic picture of the community, looking at male and female, and a whole host of other issues they raised at the time, and that I won't find enough material to occupy me even for a year if I focus simply on women's ritual and marriages and so on. It turned out to be obviously wrong, because I did what I set out to do, and what I produced out of that was not simply speaking about women on behalf of women, but using that line of inquiry and analysis to build on what was already out there, which referred to the world of men. So that if I was working on kinship and ritual, it wasn't specific about women, it was in the ways that it connects with a larger picture of which they are a part of. Whereas earlier on, the studies of kinship and ritual seems to ignore or deny the possibility that gender played a role within it, that they have a part and parcel to regarding the significance and meaning of kinship or ritual. So that, I think that the feminists in the 1970s, the women's movement did introduce a line of inquiry that I thought was good and possible. You could concentrate on issues of, on particular issues of gender without having to ignore it or make it to be subordinate to the larger questions, the larger theoretical. That kind of inquiry that I think came out of the feminists, you could use it to study a multiplicity of things. You can use to study questions of race, question of sexuality, and a number of things that it opened up a field. It's a line of inquiry. It didn't necessarily have to, I wouldn't say that the feminist movement has always been correct in how they address the women, you know, non-Western women's world, for example. But they gave us something to build on. I mean, this is the work of Marilyn Strathern when she talks about the inconvenience between the politics of feminism and the politics of anthropology.
I think that's the interesting aspect to look at in that the changes over the last few decades with increasingly radical demands being put on or to put on studies that to be of value or to be of use to the people that are being studied, and the kind of questions having to do with you know, keeping both involvement and detachment necessary to do a comparative anthropology rather than just organizing and you know, becoming involved in local politics. There is a fine line to keep there, both an involvement and detachment. And I think the success of many anthropologists as a group has shown itself that many fields that have placed special demands like feminism, Marxism, radical anthropology, reflexive, all the various literary theory influence demands, you know, from Derrida and, you know, all the literary theorists on one hand, and the positivists, the kind of human area relation styles type of generalizing anthropology based in objective facts and so forth. These two entirely between subjectivity and objectivity. The success of anthropology to have survived is that it has incorporated, it has traditionally been enriched by all these challenges and all these fields. So, for example, many feminists wanted to replace anthropology. Many Marxists wanted to kind of colonize anthropology and become a kind of absorb it into Marxism. Instead, Marxist perspectives got absorbed into anthropology. So I think that's to me, that's the beauty and promise of this discipline. And as a result, it also let go of many prejudices. It has shedded things, but we'll see what happens in the future. It's to me, it's just the most rewarding things to do in your life, especially when you're able to add to it, you know, visual methods of inquiry, when you're able to write books and films. It's just a question now that you know, universities impose far more demands on young professors than used to be the case. The administrators, it's sometimes, to me, watching things happen, look as if the administrators are asking, you know, this is the way you have to serve us, rather than this is the way we serve you. I mean, that's the way it should be, in fact. Yeah.
But you know, the question of colonizing the field, like whether it's from a Marxist perspective or any other, is still debated today on campuses. How to decolonize the discipline of anthropology. And so we inherit the field from the colonial period through colonialism, and we are with it today, but the question of decolonizing it keeps creeping up all the time. And we need to think seriously, can we go forward with it? Or should we just, like, you know, immerse it in water and let it just go by?
Yeah.
And start to think again from new? I don't know. You have to, this is something for you. I mean, I've heard this debate in the 70s when I was a graduate student. I'm hearing it now,
Yes.
coming up. So that something did not get solved.
So my question to both of you is, you know, both of you have been pioneers in visual anthropology. Can you share with us how you got interested in visual anthropology, and why do you think it is a powerful and important medium? And if you could share from some of your films, such as Gardener's Forest, Fires, Hindu Bliss, and Loving Krishna, and some other films that you've made.
I'll let Ákos start this because I came into it after, once he began it. So you want to start?
Yeah, I think our experience has been kind of salutary in that it has both differed and at the same time I think also contributed in some ways to something it didn't start with to begin with. So I remember that this was still in my years at Harvard, that just using films in teaching anthropology, but never identifying it as a kind of a straight out visual anthropology, as sometimes the discipline was defined in the early years, you know, of subordinating the visual, the film or photography to the requirements as of a text and word and print-driven anthropology, which used these methods as purely as illustrative and for gathering data, as it were. For me, the promise, and this is how it worked out over the 80s and 90s, was bringing anthropology and film together, but without shortchanging either, so that the idea for me was to make films with the full array of possibilities that film provides, at the same time informing it with anthropological theory, anthropological knowledge, and creating a kind of visual ethnography. Well, you see, film is not very good at theorizing. It is concrete, but it has other ways of alluding and creating interpretations and understanding, and it also is capable of moving people. So, which other ways cannot achieve in the same instantaneous seamless together ways. So, you know, we started making films in with the cooperation or working together of filmmakers and myself in those days, pretty much on my own in making films like Loving Krishna, which, if you look at it, it was a visual feast. We had an excellent filmmaker, and these people were trained by Bob Gardner in the visual studies department at Harvard, he himself was anthropologically trained, but he became a filmmaker early. So he was to me an example of how to bring these two fields together. And later on, he became more and more in the film direction, in the film side, and less in anthropology. But that's when I came in, and in making the film in Benares, we worked together in such a manner that he changed with his filmic demands my view of anthropology, and I think I changed his view of filming, because if you look at that film, it's what I think we achieved through his amazing, you know, cinematography, and there's hardly anyone I know who can match Gardner in terms of handling the camera, but his willingness to include areas of life in Benares, on the Ghats and on the sacred city, that we brought to him through our ethnography. That in this case I referred to Baidyanath Saraswati. I always worked with other people. Saraswati was an extraordinary, I think he is also from Mithila. You know, his home is in Mithila. In the end, he ended up in the Indira Gandhi National Institute and in the museums, and really a polymath. But so these early films, the Bengal trilogy on ritual, the Benares film, these were all, I think, a very, very salutary example of how one can profit anthropology through visual means, and vice versa. Now take just one scene from the Benares film, you know, Forest of Bliss. That it's made up of a series of ensembles that deal with different aspects of life in the sacred city. And it has various characters that involve a much larger society around them, like the Dome Raja. It's a kind of a whole kind of way of life around him. The same with Mithila, the healer, who these healing rituals. So if you take these are complete scenes that are cut according to you know, film structural demands. They're not longer, they're not shorter than they need to be, because they are informed by how we understand the ethnography of each of these situations. For example, the christening is the wrong word, the dedication, you know, blessing of a new boat. Well, it's if you unpack that scene, it goes by fast. But if you look at its elements, you don't need to be aware of it. But it's a whole understanding of, you know, what's involved in the construction of the boat, in its blessing, the role of the ritual of the people who built it, and then the launching of it, with at the same time a funerary procession arriving in the back. I mean, to bring these two visual elements that happen at the same time is, once you watch it, you're able to go and study the rituals of death and cremation, as well as the aspect of the life of the boatman. So just a little example. And then afterwards, we found that from Seed and Earth, we started working.
I was going to talk about
with Lina. That's when we started our work together, and that was a serendipitous occasion that she can tell you.
So I look at the use of film or the making of film slightly different. Initially I benefited from films that are already done by other people, and I would use one or two, and there were always a bit dissatisfaction. There was a kind of dissatisfaction with how they were shot and how they approached the images and so on. And it was with the making of Seed and Earth, which combines really Ákos's work and my work on ritual and women's ritual, or the rituals that were done in the temple and by priests also, how to combine those two together in a way that without telling you what the film is about, you get a sense of what it is. So Seed is, the title of the film comes from some of the articles that we published on kinship, on the construction of gender. It's only when you can have written and done research on a topic can you really go and do a film that's meaningful. And I read, first of all, to see what a person has done before I see the film of that person. Because unless I am convinced that there is some legitimacy in how he or she approached that topic, there is always something that's just not right. It's unexplained, something that is insufficient. Now, in the making of Seed and Earth, he started it with Alfred Fruzzetti, and somehow they stopped it was a summer, during the summer, and a year later, I went.
No, it was the same.
The same summer?
Yeah, the same summer.
So,
you see, what happened was that we started a film, and this is the situation that doesn't happen when you're doing a written thesis, that we wanted to film a ritual cycle. Now, what happened is that we didn't get the permission in time, and by the time we arrived, much of this passed, and so instead. And also, what happened is that the cultivation cycle attached with rice and the rituals, the sacred element in cultivating rice, we couldn't follow the
process,
because the inclement weather stopped the transplanting of rice seedlings. So you see, little things like that can vitiate your time in the field. And so when we started filming, people waiting essentially for the stormy weather and the rain to pass to be able to start working in the field, then we just followed what people were doing, and by the time our time was up and Guzetti, my colleague, had to return, we felt that we didn't have a film, And the reason why we didn't have a film is because we felt that the two of us couldn't film sufficiently
the women.
Sufficiently informally the women's women's rituals and women's activities, because Bengal is very different from UP. It's much more open in village life. So nevertheless, we felt that if we could persuade Lina to come back,
and so I did.
So she did with a different filmmaker.
And who does not know the language. He's never been to India before. And so the difficulty for me was to convince him that what was happening, he would say it has no visual integrity. And I said, it's not about visual integrity, it's about continuing on the process of what it is they're doing. And so there is this difficulty sometimes working with somebody who is convinced, he's a true filmmaker, but he's convinced of what a film should be. And so there was a lot of footage that he did with ducks in the pond, birds flying, which is okay. You know, I let one or two of these happen, but there was once when, this is a part of the film that I use a lot in Sydney. The women in the afternoon, they would just sit together, drink tea, and comb each other's hair. And they put the shindur, and they put the alta on their feet, and they chat about the gossip of the day. And so I said to him, turn on the camera. He said, there's nothing, they're just sitting down. I said, but I want the conversation. And the conversation it wasn't even something we asked them to talk about, but it was about a woman who just came back visiting her daughter, and she found her daughter really with bruises and so on, and she was describing to them the life that her married daughter was going through, that her husband was abusing her, he was beating her, and they were all listening to this story with such intensity. And then the young woman who had the baby, she said, well, when my son grows up, he can marry your daughter, maybe, your granddaughter. And she said, well, maybe that would be a good thing, but you have to pay a lot of money. She kept saying, you know, they're back again to the dowry question. So I use that because that, and then one other thing where women are going to take a bath and they discuss in politics in such a way that somebody in a class once said, well, how do those illiterate women know about politics? And it opens up a discussion, a debate on what we assume to know and what in fact we experience when we are in the field. So I use films for my teaching a lot, but now I tend to concentrate more on films that I had a hand in, or somebody that I know very well and I trust and I believe in the kind of film they present. But because you can use a film that's totally destroys what it is you're trying to do in a class. So visual, and why do we use film? Because sometimes this new core of students that we have these days, it's not enough for them to sit and read about Malinowski or Evans Pritchard. They want to see something of what these people are talking about. And so you show them clips and they become alive. They said, from what we have seen, somebody collects data on them and produces all these books, you know, then they become interested in the process, how to transmit an image to a word, to a film, and so forth. So I think films are very important, documentary films, especially the ones that are coming out, you know, in the last 2 or 3 decades. They're worth seeing and worth using in classrooms and so forth. I don't know if we answered your question, but give you an example that way.
But you see,
I think
these days you find a lot of films being made on aspects of life and society that used to be the preserve of so-called ethnographic filmmakers. So again, the films that are that we talked about, films that are informed by anthropology, but they're also situated as films. They're not conceived of as illustrating anthropological theories, but these have also become part of the mainstream, and you find now many films, if you look at some documentary festivals or even in anthropology meetings, the kind of films being shown, the quality has improved remarkably. And many non-anthropologists are making films that are, you know, really anthropological because they have fully incorporated these ways of looking at human beings and human life.
So actually, you've answered even the follow-up questions, because I was going to ask that, do you think there is a difference in capturing the social through the visual medium as well as the written medium? And if you think, you know, filming has a specificity as an anthropological method, would you like to add anything to it?
No, just a little bit that I find when you present, I mean, in teaching this course on ethnographic research method, they can read the whole ethnography, and sometimes ethnographies can be really dry. But when you show them a film, a documentary that's made about that community or close by, or about the topic that they have just read, they really do come alive. And I feel this generation of students that we have are so into the visual that it really makes a difference for them to see what it is that we are talking about. They really wake up.
Yeah, and you see, if to illustrate just how different films you can make in this kind of approach is if you take the film we did in the fish market in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, in East Africa, and compare that with a short film we made in Zanzibar, again with Alfred Guzzetti, our friend. The film about fishing and different methods and so forth is again a whole little dissertation on ways of marketing fish in Dar es Salaam, which is a huge city of 1 million people. And this film is about 30, 40 minutes, and it doesn't have a single printed word in it. It's all visual, and it has a few at the beginning. At the end, there are some cards providing some basic orientation, but it's entirely visual and audio that are driven and by an anthropological approach. Whereas the other one, Zanzibar film, is literally split into 5 different chapters with a lot of talk translated and interviews and so forth, and yet it's not a dry film. It's also an exciting film to watch. So you can have very different types of films that are still accomplishing something similar.
The film that he was talking about, the second film in Dar es Salaam, in Zanzibar, called Khalfan and Hamid Khalfan. It's about handicapped people, and it's about people who are either blind or deaf or missing an arm or a leg or polio. And that film has been used in so many more classes on questions of disability. Now, when we talk about disability, we think of a particular person in an electric wheelchair, maybe. with facilities that are very modern. But to talk about handicap or disabled people in a beautiful little island that's infested with tourism and so forth, people, you know, when you think of Zanzibar, you think of beauty and so on. And then you're encountering something that you didn't encounter, you weren't expecting. It also alerts you to how you define and how do you understand how people cope with disability in places that are not as economically well endowed with resources and so forth. The film was shown at the Margaret Mead Festival at 8 a.m. in New York at the festival. When I went there, the room was packed with people with electric motorized wheelchair. And we came to see what disability is all about in parts of Africa. They had no idea. And the questions they asked about that film was, well, how do they get money? There was somebody crawling on the ground. And so it's more of an educational approach also. There are some films, I think, not only visually important and useful, but also they become a type of education that shakes people to think differently. Deepali, you're frozen again.
No, I am here. I am here. No, thank you for that answer, because both of you have done immense amount of work, worked in different cultures, and I think because our blog is somewhat trying to cater to young scholars and researchers who are trying to figure out what sort of research they want to do and trying to know about different methods. So since both of you are again pioneers in visual anthropology and anthropology in general, what suggestion would you give to young students who are trying to study cultures and adopting visual anthropology as a method?
I get asked this question many times, even in class. What should I do? What should I study? When I think of, it's really hard to give you a very succinct answer to it, because people, for example, I have studied the orphans of Calcutta because I was stuck in Calcutta. I couldn't go. There were two young little girls that we had, and they had to go to school in Calcutta. So I couldn't do the kind of work I really wanted to do in Bishnupur. So personally, for me, I've always wanted to go out to the rural areas rather than the urban setting, because too many distractions for me personally in the urban sort of section. I think you can't really advise students what to do, but to select something that's of interest for them, and to select something that means that's also significant. You grow with the work you do. I became a better person, I think, with questions of identity and studying construction of gender. You come to terms with yourself. You begin to understand yourself. So they have to ask themselves, what do I want to do in a way that helps me in the field? It's important, easy, but also at the same time makes me, I can begin to also understand myself. We just published, recently there's a book that should come out, and Maitri has an article in this chapter. It's about the experience of women doing fieldwork in India as women. And each chapter is different. And each chapter will tell you what are the highs and lows of what they experience in doing fieldwork in India. And so choose a place. I tell them, choose first of all, think of a topic that's doable, that's of interest to you, that's important also, that will add maybe something that you can also use to advance in your scholarly, in your career. But also choose a place that you can actually bear being where you are. So I see that you have remaining 9 minutes, I'm sorry. But I don't know if there is a clear topic you can ask them to do. It's slightly difficult to suggest.
I think in terms of filmmaking, it's somewhat different in that people who are fully trained in that field can always find some work in some other field and keep body and soul together, and then make their films on the side. So a lot of people who make the kinds of films we like are engaged in you know, computer work or producing company films or meetings, film meetings on the side, and then they continue with their work. That obviously imposes certain sacrifices and a very different approach than if you take a grant and do a word thesis, you know, a more traditional thesis. There's also the question of employment. You know, you might find the anthropology being able to employ you in ways that not just the traditional university. Many, perhaps the majority, are finding employment outside, and then they pursue their this is imposition on the life of young people, and it's difficult. But if people have the passion to do it, they can. But it calls for commitment and perseverance and you know, bit of flexibility, especially with young families. So.
Thank
this
you
is
so
something
much.
you can answer better than we can. How it is in your case.
Okay. And thank you so much, first of all, for doing this. I mean, I hope our young scholars who are following our blog actually benefit a lot from this, because most of them are also struggling with how to do ethnographic research in COVID-19 time.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you again for doing this. We'll just stop the